So let's start out here, Scriv. What do you think of the Vitality squad? Because this is a team where I don't really have any set thoughts myself. I know what I think of the players separately, and all the great narratives, but the new team itself, I feel there's a lot of uncertainty. I'm interested to see where people are coming out in this one form. You think it's good so far, Vitality?
Not really, to be honest. If I have to come in and be a bit honest with myself, like I wasn't
expected to be like super good or something. Where were you thinking they were going to be when you heard the lineup?
Yeah, so initially I was feeling that, I wasn't a massive fan, to be honest, right? When this kind of came together. I think that with Vitality, the team that they had, with the Astralis system that, the three new members are coming from, I think there's a bit of a culture clash, right? Not like language-wise, country-wise, sure, might come into it a bit, but like team culture, definitely a clash for me, I think, in terms of the way that they both like to approach the game. And I just felt like it was going to take a long time to get that worked out. And that seems to be sort of the storyline that some of, the analysts and everything have been pushing at Pro League itself and whatnot, that it's going to be a while before we maybe see the best version of this team. And so far, I think that kind of comes in for me. They look pretty rigid, a little bit flustered, especially like in the Furia game where it comes their sort of closest showing, as it were, right, so far at Pro League, and they just looked a little bit shaky for me. So far I'm not really liking it. And it feels a bit weird because maybe the way the resources are being reshuffled around, but Zywoo's not hitting the same kind of numbers that we really want to see out of him. It almost feels like the Danish part of this team isn't necessarily the problem. It's the shift that's maybe coming for some of the French players that's causing some issues. So yeah, I feel like they are dodgy is a pretty good word for it, because the ceiling for these guys is definitely there. But there are a few fingers to be pointed, and the change. It looks like the French players don't really like the change that's come in, and maybe the fact that you've got a Magisk who's like, I'm a really solid player as well. I would like to take some of these resources away from Zywoo, and it's not quite divvying up well so far.
What do you think, Paladin?
I think fundamentally the team makes a lot of sense. I've been seeing a lot of their CT setups. I made a video about it. Their CT setups look really sound to me. I think they put in a lot of time. It definitely seems like they've done their homework, and I think that's something that would be hard to get right outside of the gates, because Apex loves playing very aggressive a lot of the times, and that's not something that dupreeh and Magisk are necessarily used to. I think that they've all started to gel really well on that side, but again, on the T side of things, the flustered concept is something that I think about a lot, because fundamentally they have a good understanding, a base level understanding of the game, but when something goes wrong, like a molly's missed or like a piece of utility's missed, and some person makes a mistake, that's when shit hits the fan and people start just looking around, looking to somebody else to really bring out an opening, look to Zywoo, and Zywoo's not providing. And it doesn't necessarily feel to me like they're all on the same page just yet. And I don't know if it's a time thing, if it's like just a chemistry thing. But there's just a lot of stuff that they have to work through on the T side. And I think slowly it'll translate to something on the CT side where, like in the mid to late round scenarios where they aren't able to clutch out very well, if it's like a French and a Dane together, or situations like that. Those 2v2, 3v3 situations where they look really uncomfortable, I think are like the main problem. So that clutch factor that Vitality had in that main French lineup is severely lacking now, that I don't think I see anywhere near this Vitality lineup.
Yeah, one thing I'll just say is, like, technically they have only played like 22 maps or something like that in this year so far. So it's not like we have an enormous sample size. I realise if you're from the mouse sports org, you're like 20 odd maps, that's all I need to see, get them the fuck out. Oh, sorry, I was just thinking about something else there, guys. But no, obviously that's a very small sample size, and obviously some of those were online maps, some of these now with the lands, etc. Like, it's true, I want to see more from them. Like, I'm not going to judge them now, but actually the Zywoo point I find very disturbing, because as I pointed out on my shows, everyone else took that one part for granted. Like, look, Zywoo frags out no matter what, no matter who's with him, because we all make out like he's been in bad teams the last few years, whereas I think actually the underrated part I think people missed of those Vitality squads, it's the reason why all the analysts raved about X-Stars. It's like, look, firepower wise, I'm with you, most of those teams often didn't have enough firepower, and Zywoo had to be like 1.5 times a normal star player. But I actually think team player wise, some of those teams had like some nous about them. Like, they had like maps that they looked like strong on, they certainly had decent comms, it appeared. Like, there was a lot. I I did think there was structure in those teams, and I actually thought the structure both accommodated Zywoo and then actually sort of like facilitated what the others were kind of meant to do to help him. Whereas based on the things I've been hearing and reading some of the interviews of how they've tried to bring this trio in from Astralis of Magis, Dupree, and obviously Zonic as the coach, it sounds like the early approach actually isn't like you're joining Vitality. It sounds more almost like it's more like we're going to set this up sort of like Astralis for the Astralis guys first, and then we're going to like fix the French guys into it. And so I have to say, like, if people haven't looked it up yet, yes, it's a small sample size, but like I don't think people realize how shocking the numbers for Zywoo are. Like, put it this way, in 2022, Zywoo has a 1.18 rating. Like, I don't think people realize that's like the kind of rating you would expect from like Frozen or something like that. Like, that's actually, listen, for a normal star player, that's still good rate. Like, for Zywoo though, that's actually like a career slump. I don't think people get how drastic it's been in that regard. And so one thing I was thinking of myself as well is this is the part where you really realize how simplistic people's analysis of Astralis was. They used to say all the right things. They got the best coach, the best system, best IGL, best star in, like best MVP, because Device used to win all the MVPs, best clutcher, best edge. But here's what people never stopped and thought was, right? Say it was true. Say all that was correct. Right? Now imagine you change the language they speak in, and now you take two people out and they're not even from your country, they're from a totally different background. And as you say, maybe they played up-tempo, like reaction-based Counter-Strike, where you make a quick read and you just attack. And maybe in their team, everyone played for one guy and he was the mega carry, and you used to play in a team that was even distribution. Like, you can see how there's a lot of like fundamental paradigm thoughts about how a team even operates that I'm sure, by the way, is an ongoing discussion in Vitality now. I'm pretty sure it's not like they sat down after a week and knew what the plan was. I'm pretty sure, this is an integration process. So I have to say, even though on paper it looked like if these players all play as well as you expect, it should immediately be a top 5 team. I'm kind of with you guys. It feels like this is the slow burner of all the other rosters that were made. This is actually the one I feel like should take the longest to sort of uptick to actually be good. And so I'm a bit shocked thus far how it's gone, but I put it this way, I don't really like bail on the team or think like, I'm out on this. I do think the pieces fundamentally can work though. I think the squad is strong enough in that regard. What do you think? Do you have any other thoughts, Scriv, about like the Zywoo angle or even just like how did you envision when they had this team? Like, for example, which of the Astralis players would you expect to be a star in this team, or would you want to be if you think they're going to be a real contender like we all hope,
Yeah, I think Magis definitely had a lot of the potential coming in, for sure, and still relatively young, right? Dupree maybe has like a reliability factor to him now. I think he's kind of lost some of maybe being second star or whatever as he could have been touted as in Astralis. But I don't know. I just feel like esports, especially CSGO in general, is going to learn this year a little bit with some of the moves that have happened in some of the bigger teams that we maybe need to be a bit more subtle about things, if that makes sense. And, moving three components, and, one of them being the coach, and trying to restructure a team completely in the case of Vitality, I think is just a little bit too much. It would have been for me, which is maybe where you're angling, that you look to Astralis, you look at those contracts ending and you go, okay, maybe we just get the coach and try and change around the pieces that we already have. Okay, maybe they're not so happy with that. You've got Shocks maybe not quite happy and the team not happy with him. And then let's also take Magisk, who we can perhaps fit in and has some really decent spots on the CT side that's a little easier to work with and still has a lot of fragging power and I think has in a way sort of untapped. We saw a little bit of it when he was like in-game leading Astralis and taking some control there and being a bit more selfish. What he was a bit more capable of, but I think that you pull him in, you put him in behind Zywoo or something like that, and you could have some pretty solid sort of dynamic duo type deal. But I think that for me, it's too big of a shift, and I'll probably bring this up when we talk about FaZe as well, where it just feels like some of the moves that are being made. G2 is another team where there's a bit too much rather than one big signing. We're looking at 2 or 3 at once, trying to take
even coaches at the same time, like you say. Like you imagine, like different stars and coaching, but these are all different elements. Yeah,
and it's like you have in this case, it's like you have some a solid individual, I think, remaining on the Vitality core, and then you're kind of just looking at Astralis, and rather than I don't know. I don't think it's as simple as this, but it kind of comes across that rather than looking individually at a player that you could pluck or whatever, and how could they fit into our current team? Who could they maybe replace and tweak rather than a full-on shift or dynamic change? They're rather looking at just kind of the prowess and the legacy of some of these players and pulling that, and the coach, of course, and pulling that across, which I think is fair. But you also have to remember that there's a little bit of a fair drop-off that comes from Astralis, right, over the course of the pandemic. Can we rely on their system and players to pick things back up, getting back to lands? And they're not quite full lands, we're going to keep using that. Because I think these types of studio-based, and they already were a thing, of course, but these types of studio-based group stages and things like that are probably going to stick around for a long while, because it saves a fair bit of money and whatnot. And, you pull out the arena for the super important games. So they're going to keep using those types of excuses as well. And I just when I looked at this change initially, I just felt like it was a bit too big. And not subtle enough. And at the moment, with the tournaments that we've seen from them this year, we're getting a fair bit of that storyline, that narrative being added to this team, where it's like, well, just give them a bit of time. Give it, we know what they're kind of capable of. And like you say, the stats for Zywoo are not great. What pops into my head, I think a lot of that kind of stat line is carried by one series as well.
Like I said, it's a very small sample size. Of course, if you have one really bad one, it's going to drag the numbers down.
Yeah. Also true. So, I think that it's very difficult at the moment for this team to really figure out how they want to approach things. And Zonic coming in, I think, is going to try and put his foot down a little bit more. Apex is a fairly emotional guy. Is that going to work out? Masuta we're seeing at the moment statistically not looking fantastic, and I think was still trying to figure himself out in the old Vitality, and now all of a sudden that he was getting close to that and had a couple of good series towards the end of and dead team and all that, but all the same he was getting there, and now it's all upside down and changed again, and he's got to readapt, which is clearly something that he's kind of struggling with. So I personally, I'm not a massive believer in this team, to be honest. Maybe that's kind of a hot take, but I just
it's the thing, mate. To be fair, normally everyone else just is automatically, it's like the maniac approach, that you're just unquestioningly optimistic and you hope everything works out because he's just a nice guy and he throw. But there has to be some cynicism. Like, think about how many big roster moves there were at the end of last year. Not every team can be fucking top 5, boys, but only 5. So realistically, like, some teams gonna have to get pushed out if we have all these big names. Like, I think that's a bold pick. If you think, like, of all the ones, like I said, I certainly don't think it's going to be like tomorrow they're good. Like, it looks like to me they're months away from it at this point, I think that's fair, Scriv. Where are you at, Paladin? What's your sort of trajectory for this squad?
I'm probably on the other side of the spectrum. I personally think they have the capability of becoming a world number 1. Like, there is definitely, if Zywoo can return to that form, I think it's possible. I think a lot of the mistakes that I was finding from their games are mostly just like team communication and like who is watching what position at what specific time. And it feels very much like if you give them, maybe if you double their sample size, perhaps they'll be in a much better position. I think Zywoo, again, he hasn't played on an international team ever before. He was only playing on French teams. That's such a huge dynamic shift. Masuta, I haven't even seen very many English interviews from him, right? Like, communicating in French and English are two wildly different situations. The kid's so young, right? He's still very much learning how to play the game at a professional level, at a tier 1 level, that I think that he's still got a long way to go to improve. And if they don't really feel comfortable with him, they can always plug and play him with another player if they're willing to be international. I think that it seems to me like the team environment is something where they understand how daunting of a task this is, and they're putting in the time to really get the chemistry up. Like, you see, they went out into the mountains one time and they were like going on a hiking trip and eating fondue,
like bonding exercises.
And it's like doing stuff like that is actually so important, right? They're treating it beyond just a job. They're treating it like, we want to become like one entity, right? We want to embody what Astralis was quote unquote so good at doing, that we want to embody that in the vitality system. And if they're able to do that, I think they have the capability of becoming a world number 1. The problem is that I still don't think that they have the map pool to suggest that at all. They barely play all 6 maps. I don't even think they have many maps that I can really point to and say, oh, that's a vitality map. I can see them as a world number 1 on that map. And that honestly, I mean, I'm sure we'll talk about it later, but that to me doesn't bode well for the near future. Obviously, I don't think they'll get out of this group in particular, but I think that in the future, this is that slow burn type roster that could find that peak of world number one.
Yeah, I think I'm actually in the unique position that I'm sort of straddled between the two of you. Because on the one hand, I think if you look at the pieces on paper, like basically I put a lot of this on Zonic essentially. Like if Zonic is who we've billed him to be, like a mastermind sort of manager type figure, but who also like has some tactical depth and sort of can develop the system. Essentially, if he can work with the tools he has, I do think this can be a potential world number one. Especially because, as Paladin says, if you can ever get Zywoo back to that incredible form he was at, like you don't need that much more than that to be able to compete. We saw that with Vitality last year. The problem is, though, that's still like a what if. Like, we've got to get that sorted. And then secondly, like, yeah, essentially he's going to have to solve unique problems that no one's ever solved. Like, I think that's the part that people maybe wouldn't get about what I meant earlier, about the fact that it looked like they were accommodating probably because they brought the coach in, the Astralis guys, more than the Vitality side. Normally, if you keep 3 people in a team, that's the core, and then you keep your spots, and like, as we said, the others slot in to do what you need them to do. Whereas the premise of this team really is, like, realistically, it's almost like Vitality bought the hype last year of like, it's just Zywoo and the rest are sort of like possibly, not necessarily needed, so just bring in other talent. And now they're trying to rejig it. But my problem is they haven't got the Zywoo part sorted, and that might yet be trickier than we've imagined. So I think it's touch and go as to whether you can get that part fixed. I think if you can, it'll be very interesting. Want to see more cool, funny, interesting clips based on topics from my content? Well, subscribe to this channel then, or, be a pleb and don't.